Hello and welcome to iFast Basketball Insiders. I am Mike Robertson, and today we are going to be talking about the top 10 squat variations for hoopers. Now, before we dive in and talk about all of the awesome squat variations, I want to start by just giving you a little bit of background on myself and how I came to these 10 squat variations. So, contrary to what a lot of people on the internet and especially YouTube would have you believe, I actually have lifted weights for quite some period of time, pushed some heavy weights back in the day, at least relative to my own performance. So this is circa 2005. I was a competitive power lifter for many years, and I believe it was maybe 520, 530 on the bar. So needless to say, for a certain period of time, especially early in my career, I believe back squats were life. Back squats are for everyone. So I knew that back squats helped me get stronger. They helped improve my vertical jump. So it just made sense that, hey, if they work for me, why not have everybody do them? And look, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that back squats aren't a great exercise or they can't be incredibly valuable for your athletes. But I will tell you that over the course of time, I realized there's probably more ways to squat than just having a barbell on your back. So let's fast forward to 2007. So I've been coaching like 7 years at this point in time, and I'm now tasked to work with a group of high school boys. And, I'm working with the high school basketball team at this local high school. And man, it was unmitigated disaster trying to teach all of these guys to back squat. And so looking back, shout out to the one and only Dan John. This is about the time Dan John starts talking about the goblet squat. And now keep in mind, if you're not, if you haven't been in this game 20, 30 years, you probably don't realize like goblet squats weren't a thing, back in the day. Somebody had to start talking about them. And in this case, it was Dan John. So in 2007, Dan John starts writing articles. He does a presentation on the goblet squat. He talks about, man, it's so simple. Hold the kettlebell in the front, sit down in between your legs, boom, perfect squat. And I remember, reading the article and watching Dan John coach. I'm like, dude, this is it. And so I immediately go back. We start playing around with goblet squats, and immediately in a team environment, I've got 12 to 15 boys of all different shapes and sizes and athletic abilities squatting very, very well. So immediately I'm starting to shift. I'm like, okay, maybe there's more to this than just back squatting. And then kind of the next big shift came in 2012. I was very lucky to work with two-time All-Star Roy Hibbert. He was playing for the Pacers at the time, which was my favorite basketball team, obviously being from Indiana. And I tell you what, nothing will make you more strongly reconsider everything you do in a weight room than training somebody that's making $14 to $15 million a year to play their sport. Immediately you realize like nothing you do in there can outpace or be more important than things they're doing on the court. And the last thing you want to do is ever have somebody get hurt in your weight room. So yeah, trust me, we got after it. I mean, Roy loved to squat, he loved to trap bar. We pushed some heavy weights, but we were also really smart in the way that we did it. I wanted to make sure that we never put him in a risk or put him in a precarious position where he could potentially get injured. And that really led me to kind of where I'm at today and the creation of this list because for the last 8 or 9 years, probably 85% of my in-person training population is basketball players. And so this list is really the culmination of the squats that I use the most on a day-to-day basis. So let's start with a really foundational question. Why should we squat? Right? Obviously, it's a great exercise and it's something that everybody does in the gym, but what makes it beneficial to basketball players? Well, again, showing my age, I'm going to do that numerous times throughout this presentation. If you go back to the early 2000s, or maybe even the late 1990s, whether we're talking about the online forums and articles, if you read the NSCA journals, everybody's talking about triple extension, right? And especially in the sense of, hey, power cleans, snatches, medicine ball throws, sprints, jumps. Hey, we're all about unlocking triple extension, making bigger or faster, more explosive athletes. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. I can totally agree with all of those things. But over time, I started to question, okay, if triple extension is so important, shouldn't triple flexion be important as well? And so one of the most important things that we do when we teach somebody to squat effectively is we restore their mobility, right? But we teach them to flex through their ankles, their knees, and their hips again. right? So it's great to have the power and the explosiveness, but can they load themselves effectively as well? Second, the ability to change levels. Now, if you've ever played basketball, you realize, hey, it is an advantage to be tall unless you need to get down low. So if you're trying to play better defense, if you're trying to load your system to explode up vertically, if you're trying to get around somebody, right? If you get lower than somebody, it's easier to get around somebody, or it's easier to stay in front of them. So that ability to change levels is something that we can actively train when we're in the weight room. Third, this one should be obvious, but strength and force development. But the other piece here, don't let certain people on the internet hear you say force absorption, right? It's like a dirty word because you can't really absorb force. But I absolutely believe you can distribute forces. So if you don't move particularly well, you may overload a knee joint or a hip joint. But if we teach somebody to squat effectively, not only can we teach them to produce force, but to distribute force when they land or when they break. Fourth, developing power and explosiveness, obviously, but especially in this case when we're talking about vertical power. So a lot of the basketball players that I've worked with over the years, they're bouncy, they're elastic, but they're great 1-foot jumpers. But maybe they're not as good off two. And so one of my goals as a coach is to always give the athlete the ability to go off their left, their right, and to go off two. So if somebody struggles to go off two and they need vertical power production, squatting can help unlock that. But, getting ahead of myself here. But really, it all comes down to intention, right? When you're thinking about writing a program, when you're working with an athlete, what is the intent? Why are you using the squat, and what do you want to get out of having it in your program? So the next question becomes, well, what does a good squat look like? And again, I grew up in a powerlifting area, and not only in powerlifting, but powerlifting was not what it is today, where there's a lot of raw lifters. Back in the early 2000s, there was a lot of geared lifting, right? And geared means there's basically really tight spandex that you squeeze yourself into to squat more weight or to bench press more weight. And some of this gear was so extreme, you could really just basically sit all the way back with your tibia or your shin bones straight up and down, sit way back and break parallel, and then stand up. But, while that may be great for moving max effort weights, it's not great for moving well on a basketball court. So for me, one of the biggest litmus tests is, hey, does it help the athlete move more effectively? Is there basketball context to it? And so within that, I think there's a couple things we need to start thinking about. Number one, can they feel their whole foot? Are they balanced? When you watch a lot of athletes squat, two things happen, or one of two things. Number one, they start to sit down, they get pushed forward, right? Super common. So can they feel that whole foot front to back? And can they feel their whole foot inside and outside? Another thing that you'll see happen, and actually this guy here, Dakota, when he first started training with us, he would get so supinated. He'd get so rolled out on the outside of his foot, it almost looked like he was spraining an ankle. Okay? So we need that balance, not only front to back, but inside and outside as well through the foot. Next, we need foot, knee, hip alignment. Okay, and if you watch enough people squat, especially when you watch them squat from the front, you'll see some people, their knees are caving in. You'll see others that are shoving their knees out. But in a perfect world, we want the foot, the knee, and the hip in a straight line, top to bottom. That's going to allow us to push into the ground most effectively. And then finally, we want the torso upright versus bent over. You'll see a lot of athletes where if they try and get in their defensive stance, their shin bones are straight up and down, they're hinged way back, and they're collapsed through their torso. So they might look low, but they're not really loaded effectively. So when we're thinking about the torso upright, I don't want them excessively arched, right? Because that's not going to help them squat effectively. But I need this long spine, I want their torso upright, and I don't want them to sit back excessively. Again, think triple flexion. Ankles, knees, hips are all loaded and basically tightly coiled, ready to go, with the torso upright so they can see everything that's going on in front of them. Next, I want to talk about squat modifiers, right? And there's lots of ways that you can modify a squat and lots of reasons you can modify a squat. Now, the areas I'm not going to focus too much on are some of these foundational ones, right? Because this just isn't the time and the place. But if you change the sets and reps, right? If you do a ton of reps, you might get more of a hypertrophy or fat loss or metabolic adaptation. If you go fewer reps and heavier load, you're going to push more strength and power production. Straightforward. If you really slow things down and own it and control it, it's a lot different than if you are trying to be fast and explosive in and out of the bottom position. As well, the rest periods that you use, right? If you're using short rest periods, again, you're going to get more of a metabolic adaptation versus if you're going for longer rest periods, more complete rest periods, you're going to get more of a neurological adaptation, okay? So that's all foundational stuff. What I want to talk more about are positional modifiers. And one of the most important things that you're going to find when teaching athletes how to squat is how to manage their center of gravity. So a lot of great athletes are naturally pushed forward. They're kind of almost on their toes. And there is an advantage to this in some sense, right? Because if you're a little bit forward, your pelvis is a little bit forward, it makes you a little bit quicker, right? But you start to lose some range of motion. You lose that ability to change levels. So one of the tools that we can use in the gym is to help them shift their center of gravity back. We got two options. Number one, we can use a heel elevation. So this is where you would use a slant board, right? Get their whole foot on there. And when you get them on that, the natural tendency, the slant board is pushing them forward. So their center of gravity is going to come back. It's going to make the lift more heel heavy. All right. So you can use heel elevation. And then a second tool that I'll generally use in conjunction with heel elevation is anterior loading. So keeping the weight on the front side of the body versus the back. So if we go back to our back squat for just a second. When you're setting up for a back squat, the bar is on your back. Just by virtue of having it back here, your shoulder blades get pinched together a little bit. You might get a little bit more curve in your lower back. And what that forces you to do is sit back. Versus if I'm using an anterior load, like maybe I'm reaching a plate out in front of me or I'm holding a goblet squat position, that creates space on the back side of my body. It allows room for air to move into the back side. And what that does, it allows me to sit down. So that's one of the most important things. If you take nothing else away from this presentation, just realize, hey, if your athletes are pushed forward and they have to sit back to squat, if you give them heel elevation and an anterior load, they're going to be able to sit down more effectively. So that's a really cool modifier. Another one is toe elevation. And we'll dive into this a little bit more. But if you ever have athletes that come in and they look like this, right? So in a perfect world, the foot, the ankle, the shin, the knee, the thigh are all in a relatively straight line. And you can see with this gentleman where, this is pointing out, and then we got a big curve coming down here. And if you looked at his femur, it would do the same thing. So you can see all these twists and turns. But one of the biggest things here is that he does not have tibial internal rotation. So some people would say he doesn't have ankle motion. That's true too. But he doesn't have tibial internal rotation. So if we use toe elevation, we can actually start to recapture that. And if you want to learn more about this, I can't recommend this webinar enough. I'll link to it in the show notes. But Bill Hartman's webinar on feet propulsion and exercise selection is absolutely fantastic for helping you understand not only heel elevation, but toe elevation as well. You can squat to a surface. So you can squat to a box, to a band. Those things will help you either break up the stretch shortening cycle, or maybe it'll just give you a consistent depth to have your athletes squat to. And then last but not least, you can do bilateral squats, you can do unilateral holds. There's all kinds of options. But the center of gravity stuff, the heel elevation, toe elevation, squatting to surfaces, these are some of the biggest squat modifiers that I'm going to see, and you're going to see them represented numerous times throughout the presentation. Last but not least, when I am thinking about classifying my squats, I basically got three groups here. Now, going back in time, if you followed me for any period of time, you've probably seen something like this, where I would talk about position, pattern, load, and express. Well, I've whittled it down even more. So your positional squats are things that just help you understand what is the bottom of a squat. What does it feel like? What muscles should I be feeling? What body postures am I attaining? Generally static holds. So pretty foundational stuff. Once somebody's mastered position, then we can start to pattern it, where they're coming in and out of that squat position, owning their center of gravity and balancing themselves front to back. And then last but not least, we've got our squats for performance. So as we go through our top 10, we've got 3 positional squats, 3 patterning squats, and then 4 squats for performance. Now, if you're enjoying this content, I want to take 2 minutes out of your day. Let me talk really quickly about iFast Basketball Insiders. Look, I've been doing this for 24 years now, and this is a chance for you to work hand in hand with me to help your athletes get the best results in the weight room and on the court. Every month, you are going to get content drops. And man, I'm telling you, this stuff alone is worth the price of admission. You're going to get how to write better programs, webinars and presentations like this. We're going to cover case studies. I've got so many athletes where we identified a rate limiter or a weakness. We wrote a training program. We got results, and I'm going to give you the rationale behind why we did certain things and the results that we got. Plus, maybe you're new, right? You haven't written a lot of programs. You don't know what you're doing. That's okay. I was there at one point in time too. Look, there are actual programs on there, like my iFast basketball off-season programs. Literally, download the program. Start using it with your athletes. Have results. It's awesome. I'm telling you guys, the content alone is worth the price of admission, but what happens when you get stuck? What happens when you don't know why something isn't working, why Johnny still has knee pain, or why Susie's quad isn't firing after her ACL reconstruction? Every month we have Q&A calls. So literally you have me for an entire hour. You can ask me anything, whether it's about writing better programs, coaching and cueing, the business side of developing your basketball program. I'm there to help you, to guide you, to mentor you. So if the content isn't enough, the Q&A calls just take it to the next level. If you're shy, you don't want to get on the calls, you can ask because we have a private forum as well. But look, you can get started today for only $7, right? I mean, you talk about like minimal risk. Come on board, 7 days, check it all out, do a Q&A. If you like it, great, stick around. And if it's not for you, that's fine as well. But at least you can say you gave it a shot. So that is my shameless plug. If you're interested, ifastbasketballinsiders.com. Check it out. Now, let's dive in to our squats for position. Now, let's unpack this a little bit. Why should we work on squat position? Well, number one, we talked about unlocking triple flexion. A lot of the athletes that I've coached over the years, maybe their ankles don't move so great, or their knees, or their hips. Generally, at least one of the 3 isn't doing what it's supposed to. And if you want to have a smooth and fluid squat, the ankles, the knees, and the hips all have to move simultaneously. Second, I want athletes to feel stuff. And I'll be really honest with you, as you're watching these next 3 exercises or videos, you're probably going to be like, that doesn't look hard. And if you've never done it, it may not look challenging. You may immediately brush it aside and think, I'm never going to do that. But I'm telling you, if you've not tried this stuff, try this next exercise. And once you've tried it, give it to an athlete. You put somebody into the bottom of a PVC ISO squat. You really make them own that position. They are going to feel quads like never before. And I love it when an athlete comes to me and they're like, oh yeah, you know, my glutes or my hams, they get sore, but I never feel my quads. I give them that exercise on day 1 and immediately I have buy-in because they're feeling stuff that they've never felt before, which is pretty cool. Number 3, we can talk about creating space. So a lot of athletes get really squished front to back. A lot of traditional strength and conditioning programs where it's just squats, bench presses, deadlifts, chin-ups. All those big muscles on the front and back side of the body squish us front to back. And what happens is our sockets, right, like our big ball and socket, or our big ball and socket joints, right, like our hips and our shoulders, they start to get pointed outward, and now we start to lose internal rotation. We lose that ability to push into the ground. So when we do these exercises and we breathe and we create space front to back, it just unlocks our body. All of a sudden, everything feels a little bit easier. And then finally, as you're going to see, all of these exercises are isometric in nature. And as we'll talk about a little bit later on, long duration iso holds are fantastic for tendon health. If somebody's got cranky patellar tendons, you can do some of these exercises immediately before they go on the court. You can also use it early in an off season, right, to start to better rebalance that muscle tendon relationship. Okay, so they're great for tendon health, but they're also great because they're not moving. They're not dynamic. You're really just putting somebody in a position and having them feel the right things. So our squats to work on position include, number 1, a PVC Reaching ISO Squat. 2, a suspension trainer ISO squat, and number 3, a low cable ISO squat. So let's dive in. Our PVC Reaching ISO squat looks pretty simple, right? You're just going to camp out in this bottom position here. And so you can see Keelan in this first video, almost all of these, we've got heel elevation. Very rare that I have an athlete squat without at least like a 10-degree slant anymore. But you can see in this first one, you can see how much this bar is bending. He's basically hanging on to the bar. You can see his knees aren't really balanced, right? They're kind of behind. He's kind of leaning back, essentially. So this is in July, right? And you can see the position that he's in. And I mean, he's working here, right? He's working. But then look at July to August. I had to go back and look because I was so shocked at this difference in performance and alignment. Now, there's still stuff to work on here, right? I'd like to see maybe a little bit more heel heaviness, maybe a little bit longer through his spine, but damn, that's a big change in 1 month time. So why do we use a PVC Reaching ISO squat? Well, number one, we want to find and feel the whole foot. And not to get on too far of a tangent, but anytime you are on a slant board, you are making something heel heavy or a little bit heel emphasized. And that's fine. Because again, you use a slant board to help shift somebody's center of gravity back. But with that in mind, just know heel heavy doesn't mean heel only. So I want heel heavy, but I still want them to have that balance through the whole foot. Once we're there, we want to think about creating space. We want to think about breathing front to back. So they're just going to camp out in this position. And a lot of times I will just coach it for breaths versus time. So I'll say, hey, go into this position and then hold for 5 breaths. And you're filling front to back. But the best thing here is loading and feeling quads. I'm telling you guys, if you've never felt your quads when you squat, or you have an athlete that's never felt quads when they squat, give them this exercise, give them 3 sets of 5 breaths. They will feel quads like never before. So coaching cues. Well, number one, we're thinking about reaching long, right? We want to think about inhaling and expanding the thorax front to back. So we want to create space. Reach, inhale, fill those chest walls, fill that upper back, right? We want to think about balancing through the foot. We don't want to be too far on the heels or on the toes. We want balance. And then the final piece, don't hang, be active. And that's the biggest difference between this video and this one. Here he is hanging. He's just kind of hanging in his squat position versus here he's being active and he's owning his squat position. So that's our PVC Reaching ISO squat. Second, we have our suspension trainer ISO squat. So this looks and feels very similar. Same things here. We want to find and feel the whole foot. The biggest difference is where we are putting our shoulders and our arms. So in this case, when we're reaching overhead, and I'm just using, I believe these are Jungle Gym attachments here, but you can use a TRX, blast straps, whatever you have access to. You're using the suspension trainer, and basically what it's going to do, it's going to pull the sternum and the rib cage up. So people will use all kinds of different terms. They can talk about a kyphosis, they can talk about a down pump handle, but if you have somebody that's really pulled forward like this exercise is great for getting them to reach and to get long through their spine and get up overhead nice and tall. So kind of one of the things that I'm thinking about here is creating length through the lats, because a lot of times when people go overhead, if their lats are very stiff, you're going to see it's going to negatively impact their shoulder flexion, and they're going to see a big curve or an increase in the curve through their lower back. So I love this exercise for creating length through the lats and just getting long and tall through the spine. So as far as our coaching cues go, reach long. You want to inhale and expand the thorax A to P, or front to back. Now, if you're thinking about the previous exercise, it's pretty standard. Front to back, right in the middle. Now, when you're doing this exercise, what you're going to see more of is this lower posterior thorax is going to be a little bit more open, and this upper chest wall is going to be a little bit more filled. So think about if I'm pulled down like this, right? This area is closed off. So I'm using that weight and then trying to fill the upper chest walls when I'm doing that squat. And then from there, I want to feel the whole foot. And this one is a little bit more relaxed. I want them to hang in this bottom position, and I'm just trying to create some space and create some length top to bottom. So that's number 2, our suspension trainer ISO squat. And then we have our low cable ISO squat. And unfortunately, I couldn't find a better model for this one. Apologies. But I really like this one because if you have really big or stiff athletes, the person that just walks around and they're on their toes all the time, they need something to really help offset that. And so when you're using the low cable and you're using weight, you can load the weights up as much as you need to help them dig those feet in and shove themselves back. So I think of this as kind of like a worst case scenario. If somebody just can't understand how to shift their center of gravity back, how to find their heels, use this variation. And what it does, it really just allows, when you're using that V handle attachment, it just allows everything on the backside to open up. And it's going to allow you to sit down. So we're thinking about reaching long through the arms. We're sitting down, feeling the whole foot. Now, I'm going to show you one more time. Again, you want to feel that whole foot, but you can see knees not really coming over the toe here. I'm really trying to find my heels and just using those arms to be long, and I'm breathing. Trying to use the stretch, right, from the weight to breathe and create some space on the backside of my body. So I'm telling you guys, if you haven't tried any of these, go in the gym, try them out. They will absolutely make a positive impact in how your squat feels. But I also realize those probably aren't going to sell you or sell your athletes on coming into the gym. Yeah, they might want to move and feel better, but ultimately they want to start moving. They want to start doing stuff. So that brings us to squat patterning. So why should we work on squat patterning? Well, number 1, at some point we have to move from static to dynamic activities. Whether it's in a gym or on a court, you can't just camp out in the bottom of your squat and hold it, right? Nobody's giving you any gold medals for that. So we need to be able to move in and out of that bottom position while maintaining our center of gravity and maintaining balance throughout. It's one thing to get down there and then shift around and wiggle and find the right position. It's different when you're coming in and out of that position repeatedly. And then last but not least, hey man, I want to at some point get into the awesome exercises that we all want to do, right? Whether it's front squats or back squats or flywheel squats. At some point, we want to get to the cool stuff. So the patterning exercises really work as a bridge to get into more of those performance-based lifts. So squats to work on patterning. We got 3 here as well. We've got our heels elevated, plate reaching squat. We have our heels elevated, goblet squat. And we have our toes elevated, roller supported hack squat, which is a mouthful. But I kind of think of these 2 as working hand in hand. And then this third one kind of does its own thing. So let's dive in. Our heels elevated reaching squat is a low load squat progression. So let's say somebody is really far forward. Maybe we're working on that the reaching squat, the ISO, where we're using the cable. This could be used in conjunction with that as something a little bit more dynamic to start to grease that groove. But it's low load, and by default, it has to be, because unless you're just a massively or freakishly strong human being, you're not taking a 45-pound plate and reaching it out and extending your elbows repeatedly while trying to squat. It's just incredibly hard. So even a 5 or 10-pound plate can make a big impact. So what it does, it makes it really easy to manage your center of gravity. So we got heels elevation, which shifts us back. And then when we take that plate and we reach out in front, that pushes us even further back. So once we're there, now we're in this really stacked position. Our ankles, knees, hips, shoulders, right? I mean, I am not a great squatter by any stretch, but I'm pretty well vertical right here, which makes it feel very fluid and easy. And what you don't want to do is have your athlete feel like a collection of body parts the first time they're in the gym, right? If it's like a hinge 1 rep, and then it's like super on the toes and knees dominant the next rep, they're not going to like it. So we want to make it feel fluid and easy. And that's the best thing I think about this exercise. So as far as our coaching cues go, we're going to reach long with the weight back. We want to feel the whole foot. We want to sit down. And then one of the biggest things here, I'm always cueing my athletes to push to stand up, right? Push to stand up, because we're trying to think about pushing into the ground, because this will carry over. Once we start to get into our jumping activities, maybe we don't use push, right? Because it's a little bit slower external cue. Maybe we think later about pop or explode. But we teach somebody what it feels like to push away from the ground or away from the ramps in this case, and you start to unlock, right, some of these movement or performance cues. Next, we have our heels elevated goblet squat. So again, the reaching squat from before isn't super cool. Let's just be honest. Like, nobody really thinks, oh, this is awesome. You might be able to sell them on it for a couple weeks though to pattern their squat. So that's generally what I'll do. If somebody is very far forward, we'll use that for a couple weeks to get them to grease that groove and to understand how the squats should feel. And then we're going to try and get them into a goblet squat, because this would always be my standard entry point if possible. So the heels elevated goblet squat, again, shifts the center of gravity back because we've got heel elevation in an anterior load. It allows the athlete to feel the whole foot. And honestly, it may not be like the coolest exercise in and of itself, but it preps us for those later squat variations. So again, if I can, I want to start with this first, and then we can get to the cooler, bigger bang, sexier activities later on. So our coaching cues here. Number one, elbows in and down. And I want to focus on this for a minute, because a lot of times when you see athletes goblet squat, if they've never been coached or it's just been, hey, grab the kettlebell, squat down. What ends up happening is just like a back squat. When they grab here, if they do this kind of thing, they pinch their shoulder blades together, if they increase the curve in their lower back or they compress, everything on the back side of their body, initially what they have to do, they have to sit back. Versus if I cue them to bring the elbows in and down, you can see how I create space on the back side of the body. And if there's space, that means I can sit down effectively. So I want elbows in and down. I want them to feel the whole foot, and I want them to think about sitting down and pushing. Okay? And again, Keelan is somebody that, has worked really hard over the years to clean up his squat. And man, he makes it look really good here. I mean, for a guy that's 6'7" and a walking bucket, his squat looks really, really solid. So those first two are great if you're shifting center of gravity back. But what happens if you have an athlete that walks in and they look like this, right? So you can see we want foot, ankle, shin bone, knee, thigh, all in a straight line. But what happens when, the feet are going one way and then there's this twist through the tibia and the femur? How do you clean it up? Because I'm telling you what, you do regular squats with this person, chances are they're going to have some knee stuff. It's not going to feel great. Chances are they have knee stuff anyway. Let's just be honest, because they don't have that tibial internal rotation. So this is where that toes elevated version can come into play, because the toes elevated version is great for unlocking tibial internal rotation. Beyond that, just teaching an athlete how to push. Right? So what you're going to find is, and Larry's going to do a good job of it here, when he sits down into this, there's a very clear stopping point. You're going to see the knees come over the toes. He basically just runs out of tibial internal rotation, and that's where he has to push to stand up. So as far as our coaching cues here, number one, we want elbows in, and we want the heels heavy. Now, we're not like digging the heels in, but I want to make sure they maintain heel contact. Because one of the things you will see here, the second the knee starts to come over the toe, if they're not doing it right, they're going to push everything towards their forefoot or to their toes, right? So I want to make sure they maintain heel contact throughout. From there, I want to make sure that they sit down, their knees come over their toes, and again, he gets to a certain point, he's got nowhere else to go. He can feel a good, strong push. But what you're really looking for here, my friends, is getting that tibialis anterior to turn on. Right? You start getting their foot, their knee, and their hip in a straight line when you're looking at them from the front, and chances are they're going to move and feel so much better. So last but not least, we have our squat performance exercise. And this is where things get fun. And hopefully you already know the answer to this question. Why should we work on squat performance? Duh. All the reasons that we got into this game in the first place, right? We want to help our athletes get bigger. We want to help them get stronger. We want to help them get more powerful. This is where things get fun. But we have to lay the foundation with the position and patterning exercises first. So my 4 favorite squats to work on performance are the heels elevated 2 kettlebell front squat, the safety bar squat, overcoming ISO squats, and flywheel squats. So let's dive in and let's talk about these. So the heels elevated to kettlebell front squat is probably my first go-to when I'm looking to actively and maybe a little bit more aggressively load my athletes. Now, don't get it twisted. You can load a goblet squat. But we all know if you picked up a heavy enough kettlebell and tried to goblet squat it, it's not so much a leg struggle at that point as it is just like a torso and grip issue, right? It gets really hard to hold the postural position that you want. So this is where we get into kettlebell front squats. It's this like beautiful blend of load and ideal position. It's very, very hard to screw this up. Second, if you work in basketball long enough, you know a lot of these guys have back stuff. So any activity that I can use that will load them effectively and decrease back issues is a win. And finally, we talk about feeling stuff. When they're doing this exercise, they're feeling quads and they're feeling core. And again, these are athletes that in many cases have never felt, especially their quads in a squat before, and now all of a sudden they come in a day or two later and their quads are absolutely crushed. We know we're doing the right things. So again, we got my guy Ed here, and man, just watching these guys like evolve and see their movement improve over the years is really cool. But for a guy that's 6'6" and just like a human rubber band, his squat has really, really improved over the years. So as far as coaching cues go, we want elbows forward and weight back. We want to feel the whole foot. We want them to sit down. Now, here's an analogy, and maybe you have to be of a certain age, but you've heard me use this numerous times now. Sit down. Well, you know, back in the day, if you have ever heard of a phone booth, right, before we had cell phones and all that, you would have to get into a booth, which was just like a big square. You know, you walk in, call your friend, mom, whatever. Well, if you wanted to squat in that, you couldn't sit back. You couldn't hinge back. If you wanted to squat in a phone booth, you had to sit down. So that's one of the analogies that I'll use is, hey, squat in a phone booth, sit down. And immediately it creates this visual representation that your athlete is like, oh, okay, I get it. So sit down, squat in a phone booth, whatever it takes. And then when they come up, you want to cue them to push. Actively push the ground away to stand up. Next, we have our safety bar squat. And I'm going to say this too. I'm going to put in a little caveat. I will never tell you that there are bad exercises. And along that same vein, I will never tell you that a back squat is a bad exercise. Now, I will tell you, I don't choose to use them very often anymore for a lot of reasons. And part of it is my bias and the level of athlete that I'm working with. I don't know if the risk to reward ratio is strong enough for me. But I do use a safety bar squat. And here is why. Number one, there's still a time and a place to get some load on the bar and to load your athlete's system. So safety bars are great for getting some heavy-ish weights on their body and through their system. This variation as well, this isn't a traditional safety bar. This is actually called a spider bar from Elite FTS, but I love this bar because it's a little bit longer handle in the front and it allows you to keep that reach. Remember, when we pin the shoulder blades back, when we create compression on the backside, we're forced to sit back. If we can reach forward, it allows us to sit down more effectively. So I really feel like if we want to manage an athlete's center of gravity, this is the best back squat variation we have access to. So, man, Ed's going to ask for royalties for all these videos I got of him in here. But coaching cues, we want to reach through the hands or through the elbows, especially as he sits down, reach forward. That keeps the backside open. Feel the whole foot. Balance through the foot. And then we're going to push or explode. And man, lots of modifiers going on here, right? So we got the heel elevation. I'm having him squat to a box because the last thing I need is a guy like Ed to get buried in the bottom of a squat. And then we're actually working on pushing up a little bit harder or a little bit more explosively because we know most athletes get stuck in the bottom. So I give him a stopping point, but then I'm also using the bands to help pull him out of the bottom just a little bit. So lots of stuff going on there, but man, if you want to load a squat variation, the safety bar squat may be your best option. Next, we have an overcoming ISO squat. And there's not much to this, so I'm not even going to bother playing the video, but the best part about an overcoming ISO squat is you need absolutely zero technique to do it effectively. You literally get in the position and then you start pushing into the bar. When you do that, right, you can really max out motor unit and muscle fiber recruitment. there's no technique involved. So you can literally just push as hard as possible up against an immovable force. And depending on how you want to do it and what you want to get out of it, you can do short or long holds. So if you want to do short holds, like a half second to maybe 1 second, you can chase some RFD or rate of force development changes. Or if you want to go longer, 4 to 5 seconds, now you can chase some max force outputs as well. So lots of utility here, lots of ways you can do it. As far as coaching cues, big things I'm focused on, I want balance through the foot, right? You can see even here, Dakota used to be very far forward. This is a little bit older video, but you want to be balanced through the foot. So you can really lock the foot in, strong foot position, and then push, okay? Now, once you're balanced, before you start pushing, it's important to take the slack out of the bar. What you'll see a lot of athletes do is they'll like bang and like drive themselves into the pins. I don't think you get anything out of that. So instead, what I would do is take the slack out. So kind of push gently, find that end point, and then start pushing your rep as hard as possible. And then once you're there, audible cueing, motivational cueing is really important. So once they're there, push, 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 right? Alex Natera talks about this in his isometric course, but it's such an important piece because if you want to get really high levels of effort, you need to give them some cueing. You need to give them some external motivation because, you know, it's really hard otherwise. Some athletes are not naturally motivated and some, you can make it look hard and not really push hard. So giving them some audible cueing helps. If you really want to make it like best practice and make it objective, you can put them on force plates. Realize not everybody has access to those, but just giving some audible cueing and some external motivation can make a big difference. So our final squat variation for performance are flywheel squats. And man, these are just an awesome tool to have in the toolbox. Shout out to Exerfly. We've been using their flywheel for about 3 years now. But a lot of athletes just say it feels athletic, right? It just feels fluid. It feels athletic. They're not constrained by a barbell, a dumbbell, a kettlebell. Keep in mind, these are really free-flowing athletes, right? So the second they're like tethered to a heavy weight, it just feels uncomfortable or awkward. The final piece here is that there is a definite emphasis on braking, right? Or, you know, just like the eccentric portion. Now, with that being said, and for the sake of clarity, don't let people tell you it is an overload. And before I go into that, let me just unpack flywheel training really quickly. So if you're using a standard barbell and you're doing a squat, you lower down, right? And you can take as long as you want. But when you push up, you can push up fast, you can push up slow, but when you're done, the rep is done. The bar's not doing anything other than staying there and pushing you down or pulling you down due to gravity. Now, a flywheel is a little bit different because a flywheel stores energy. So when you go down slow and then you push up slow, there's not a lot of energy stored, so it's going to pull you down slow again. So whatever you put into it, it's going to give you back. So if you push up slow, it pulls down slow. Now, contrast, if you push up really hard, it's storing all that energy, it's going to slingshot you down very hard. So while it's not necessarily eccentric overload, I do feel like it gives more of an emphasis on the eccentric or the braking portion of the lift than traditional barbell, kettlebell, and dumbbell activities do. So I definitely think there's some utility and some merit to using flywheels in your program. As far as coaching cues go, very important, you need to find balance at the start. If you're not balanced at the start, it's going to be very hard because that thing's going to be jerking you all over the place. So you got to get balanced and get set at the start. You need to do 3 to 4 reps to catch a rhythm. So you kind of got to catch your rhythm and get the way you, or get the pace and the cadence that you want. And then you can start being a little bit more forceful and active. And that's where I will tell my athletes, I want you to ramp up to where you're pushing pretty hard, but I never want you to get buried in the bottom. And so if you've watched people that are either pushing too hard with a flywheel or they have too many discs on, they'll start pushing up really hard. They'll try and get down and they'll stop. And then that flywheel momentum keeps going and pulls them down even further. So I never want athletes to get buried in that bottom position. And that's where there's also a little bit of a learning curve to this, because if you've been coaching weights long enough, you kind of know, okay, this athlete can do about this much weight. You know how to pick weights, right? And the longer you do it, the better you get at it. Well, when you're using something that's totally foreign to you, like a flywheel, you got to err on the side of caution. Use light weights to start, and then slowly start to figure out, okay, what disc is going to be appropriate for the athlete standing in front of me and for the specific exercise that they're doing. But the long and short of it is, if you have access to a flywheel, flywheel squats are arguably one of my favorite squat variations of all time for my basketball players. Now, I don't know about you, but anytime somebody does a top 10 list, I love to know the honorable mentions, right? I love to know, oh man, like what was right there but didn't quite make the list. Okay, so because I'm a man of the people, I give you 3 honorable mentions. The first one is the Spanish squat. And if you follow basketball, you can see the inside joke here. When I Googled the term Spanish squat, somewhere this came up. And this is not a Spanish squat exercise, but this is a Spanish man doing a squat in basketball. So sorry for the bad joke. But we got Spanish squats, we got roller supported hack squats, and we have drop squats. So let's cover these and then we'll wrap up. So Spanish squats are fantastic. If you are dealing with athletes that have patellar tendinopathy or jumper's knee, that very focal pain right below the patellar pole, hey man, if you train basketball players, volleyball players, you're going to see it. You need something in the toolbox to work on it. So for a lot of athletes that are in season, they're just trying to manage it, you can have them do 3 to 5 sets of 30 to 45 second holds, owning this position. And a lot of times they can do this and then get immediately on the court and do okay. So there's an analgesic effect, right? A pain reducing effect. But then there's also this hypothesis where a lot of people will say, well, when somebody has a patellar tendon issue, the tendon is getting too stiff. Now keep in mind, a certain amount of stiffness is good, right? Stiffness helps us run fast, jump high, lift heavy things, all that good stuff. But when it becomes too stiff relative to the muscle, that's when we start to have some of these tendon issues. So it's been hypothesized that when you camp out in this position, it creates, this muscle starts to shorten, it creates maybe some length through the tendon, and it starts to rebalance that muscle tendon unit. Okay, now again, that goes beyond kind of my expertise, the why, but regardless, I will tell you this. I've had numerous people that have had patellar tendinopathy over the years, and this is one of the entry points into getting the tendon healthy and starting to get them back into a more functional progression. As far as coaching cues go, we need the band behind the knees. We want to make sure they feel the whole foot. Very important here. Make sure they can feel their heels, their toes, the inside and outside of the foot. And then finally, the position of the torso is important here. Because again, you'll see a lot of athletes that are like arching when they do this. So I need their elbows forward and I want them to keep that back open when they're in this bottom position. Next, we have roller supported hack squats. Now, IFAST is a small facility, and as such, we do not have an unlimited amount of space or an unlimited budget. So we have to be smart. We can't have every single piece of exercise equipment on the planet. So if you don't have a hack squat, here's a cost-effective way to hack squat. And what it does is, since the torso is behind the middle of the foot, even though we don't have heel elevation, it gives you some of those same feels, right? So you're going to get a little bit more heel dominant squat. And again, a lot of the athletes that I work with, especially early in the off season, that are dealing with some knee stuff, this is a way that we can load their quads and start to build a little bit of something that looks like a squat pattern, just load their legs with minimal knee issues. So I really like this one. So as far as setup goes, we need the roller in the small of the back. We want the heel heavy, but they still need to feel the whole foot. Okay, and that's important. Heel heavy, but still feel the whole foot. And then from there, we want them to sit down, but we need to allow the knees to track forward. And this is where the setup is important, and you got to figure out what works best. So if an athlete is really struggling with knee stuff, maybe I'm going to have their feet really far out in front of them. So make it really heel heavy, right? And their knees really don't track forward over their toes at all. But if they're pain-free and we can load their legs, that's a win. Now, contrast that with, hey, once we maybe get that athlete feeling better, now maybe our progression is we start to get their heels closer to the wall. Now, as they sit down, the knees start to come over the toes a little bit more. So this is how it looks if you are interested. But you can see heel heavy, knee over the toe. And then as he would progress, if we wanted to, we can move the heel further and further back to try and get a little bit more ankle and knee flexion. Last but not least, we have our drop squat. Sorry about that. Our drop squat. And again, Ed's going to be asking for royalties here for sure. But this is an awesome activity for improving braking, for getting the pelvic floor to ascend and stop momentum. So a lot of times when you free fall, obviously the guts, the pelvic floor are falling down. We need them to stop, right? Unless we want to melt into the ether, at some point you need to stop and you need to reverse course. So again, if you're interested in guts and feet and all that stuff, be sure to check out Bill's stuff. And finally, balancing tension and relaxation. So there's literature out there that will tell you, obviously it makes sense, right? When it's time to be tense, you want to be tense. But the best athletes have the ability to be tense when it's important, and they have the ability to relax when they need to as well. So Ed does an awesome demo here. So we want to set up and we want to make sure we have balance through the foot. We want to drop the body and the kettlebell in this squat, right? And then from there, basketball analogy, stop on a dime or just stick. That's what I'm telling Ed. Set up, whole foot, stick. And you can see he drops down quick and then stick. Just a really cool contrasting exercise. And I know people are loving talking about braking now. Rightfully so. It is important. If you want to train braking in the gym, here's an awesome way to do that within your squat pattern. All right, my friends, let's bring this all together. So what do we talk about today? Why should we squat? Well, whether it's unlocking mobility, balancing and achieving triple flexion, whether it's building strength, distributing force, making somebody stronger and more powerful, there's tons of reasons that we should squat. What does a good squat look like? Again, triple flexion, ankles, knees, hips. We want the torso upright. We want balance through the foot so that not only looks aesthetically pleasing when they're in the gym, but that it carries over to when they get on the court. We talked about our 3 types of squats. So we talked about positioning, we talked about patterning, and we talked about performance. But I think at the end of the day, what you have to ask yourself when you go through a presentation like this is, what do my athletes need? So if somebody's never squatted before, maybe they need a lot of positioning work. They need to learn the positions, they need to pattern, right? Just start there. Give them a great foundation. If they're a high-level pro, maybe they need a little bit of that stuff, the first week or two, just kind of refresher, maybe recapture some motion and positions, and then you can jump back into loading. But this is where critical thinking is really, really important. You got to figure out what does the specific athlete need and how can I give them the best squat to improve their performance. Then we talked about our 10 squats. So we talked about our positioning exercises, right? Our PVC reaching, our suspension trainer, and our low cable, right? All fantastic options for feeling the right things, recapturing positions, and just helping athletes understand what the bottom of a squat should look and feel like. From there, we talked about patterning, right? Our heels elevated, plate reaching, and our goblet squats are great for shifting the center of gravity back and teaching an athlete to change levels. Then we had our toes elevated, which is great for your athletes that maybe have, the duck feet going on and, the alignment from the foot, knee, hip is not what we would like. It's a great exercise for unlocking that tibial internal rotation and getting the knees to come over the toes again. Then finally, we have our performance-based squats. So our heels elevated, 2 kettlebell front squat, our safety bar squat, great for loading. If you just want some pure outputs without having to think about technique, you got your overcoming ISO squats. And then arguably, again, my favorite, just because it brings all these pieces together and it feels super athletic and organic, is a flywheel squat. So, one final shameless plug. If you are not a member of iFast Basketball Insiders, please do not wait any longer. Not only do you get, all of my 24 years of experience, but every month, monthly content drops that are going to make you a better coach. You can learn at your own pace, your own time. You're going to get great stuff every month, guys, like program design, coaching and cueing, things that I'm using to help my athletes move and feel better. So you're going to get the content drops. You get access to me via the Q&A calls in the forum. So whatever works for you. You want to jump on our Q&A calls and we want to work through some stuff? Great. You don't have time. You're shy on camera. You don't want to ask. That's cool. Put it in the forum. I'll answer it there. But look, you can get started today. It's only $7, right? You really have nothing to lose. ifastbasketballinsiders.com. And if you're not in this space and you just watch this long, I appreciate it. Maybe just pass this video on to somebody else that you know, that a basketball coach or an athlete or an S&C coach that is in this space that could benefit from it, because maybe they would enjoy joining. So my friend, that does it for this presentation. Man, I love talking about this stuff. I really hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you learned a thing or two as well. So thank you so much for watching. Love and appreciate you, and we'll talk soon.